I think that forgiving is a process, first of all. Not many people can handle deep hurts in a single flash. It's a process. I think that it occurs in 4 stages. Number 1, you've been hurt. You've been hurt deeply, and you acknowledge the hurt. You don't deny it. Number 2, you blame. You blame the person who hurt you. You don't excuse them. You don't say it doesn't matter. You blame them. So something has happened between you and that person that makes it impossible for you to carry on the relationship as if nothing had happened. You hurt, you blame, you surrender. What do you surrender? You surrender your right to get even. And this is what makes it so hard. You have a right to get even. Every moral instinct tells you it's right to balance the scales. You take that right and you say, I'm going to live with scales unbalanced. I'm going to live with loose ends untied. I surrender my right to get even. In the 4th stage, you begin to revise your feelings. The person who hurt you gradually rejoins the human race, and your feelings change from feelings of hate and resentment to feelings that recognize that the person who hurt you is a failed, a flawed, fallible human being, not much different from you are. And gradually, once the person you forgive joins the human race, becomes a fellow human being with you, and your feelings begin to accept that, somewhere along the line, you're going to get the power to wish that person well. And the first time you feel that you can think of the person who hurt you and just wish or pray that something good could happen to that person. Maybe the good is the good that he will not do it to anybody else. When you reach that point, you know you're on the way. That's what forgiving is to me.
My brother Larry bought my mother a car. She was older, and they were always talking about getting her a smaller car. And she was getting kind of fragile as she was older. Well, my brother bought about 6 cars at once and turned in her wonderful old Cadillac that the windows went up and down with buttons and the doors opened and closed easily, and she was used to driving it. And he got her a Chevrolet that was 6 inches shorter, and the doors practically knocked you down, and the windows you had to crank. And I can't really forgive my brother for that kind of stuff. He's done lots of other stuff, but that one in particular is when I just want to stay away from him, and I do.
One rule that I have about forgiving is that you only forgive people who hurt you. Larry hurt Guy's mother, but when you hurt my mother, you hurt me. Okay? Hurt my kids, you hurt me. So I think what Larry did to his mother did hurt Guy. But I get a sense that it wasn't just what Larry did. I think Guy is stuck on the not very nice person that Larry is. And that's tough. You can forgive people for what they do. It's very hard to forgive people for what they are. I don't think that God forgives us for what we are. I think God forgives us for what we do. When it comes to what we are, He accepts us. And accepting somebody is not the same as forgiving them. You forgive something they did that they're responsible for. You accept them in spite of, and sometimes because they're really wonderful human beings underneath all of that. And I hope that Guy will one day gradually get to the place where maybe he discovers that he doesn't have to forgive Larry. maybe all he has to do is say, Larry is a faulty, blemished human being, a lot like me. And then say, so we're on the same wavelength, so I'm not going to carry this grudge against him, but that doesn't mean I have to like him. We'll get together at Christmas time, but I don't have to be a close friend of my brother. But I love him, and if he's in trouble, I'll go to help him.
Pretty much through my life, I've had a terrible time forgiving myself. And I've had lots of failures, things like that. And failure was one of those things that simply was not really allowed in the family. And I roundly heard about that every time it happened, in lots of different ways. Perhaps my most recent failure is I failed to finish seminary, and that worked on me quite a bit, and I've had a very difficult time forgiving myself for that. That inability to forgive myself is the thing that has colored my life now for, well, perhaps 63 of 65 years. And since I've been working through the 12-step programs, I've come to realize that I can do that. I can forgive myself for those errors. It's true I may have made some mistakes, but that doesn't mean I can't go on and live my life. They certainly weren't fatal errors.
Well, there's a difference between failing and being a failure. And I'm so glad that he, through a program that he has entered, is overcoming that. He says he learns to forgive himself for failing. And I could strain at a gnat here and say, you don't have to forgive yourself for failing. But I'm glad he does it anyway. And I'm glad that it releases him from the burden of having to be a success. My own hunch is that Jim is like so many people, and like myself in some ways, that what you feel is a failure to forgive yourself, when what you're suffering is the shame, the feeling of being a bad person that somebody else has laid on you. Jim, in my judgment, is suffering from what I call shame. And that's a hard nut to crack, because it's a feeling about yourself. It's a translation of what you did that was either wrong or silly or unsuccessful. And you translate that as the definition of your very being. I lied, I'm a liar. I failed, I'm a failure. I did something crazy, therefore I'm nutty. You follow me? And Jim got snookered by people who were probably good and decent people in other ways, but they did him great harm. And I hope that one day he's going to get so angry with them at that thought that they robbed him of a lot of freedom and a lot of power and a lot of happiness, because shame destroys your happiness. It disables you. It almost dooms you to failure if it gets a good hold of you. And he didn't deserve any of that.
Forgiveness is saying, what you did, I understand, and it's all right with me. And so I'm very confused on the issue, even though in many ways it seems central to our faith. I mean, it is in the Our Father. It's a very central part of faith, and I'm having a lot of trouble with it.
Sonia said two things to me. One is that forgiving is big in the Christian faith, and it is. And one wonders why. I think it's big in the Christian faith for two reasons. One is, I think the Lord knew how often people get hurt and how often healing is necessary. And he knew that forgiving was the only way to cope with it. There was a marvelous Jewish philosopher by the name of Hannah Arendt, who wrote a magnificent book called The Human Condition. And at the very end of the book, she made this sentence. She wrote this sentence: "The only remedy for the irreversibility of history is the faculty of forgiving." I think our Lord knew that when things happened, they happened, and you can't undo them. And forgiving is the only remedy. Okay, she's dead right about that. Sonia said that to her, forgiving was going to another person and saying, "You hurt me, but I understand, and it's okay." For me, forgiving is going to a person, either in your fantasies or in reality, and saying, "I don't understand. I'll never understand. And it wasn't okay, and it isn't okay. But I forgive." The important thing about Sonia is that I want to respond to is that forgiving does not make a person a doormat. Forgiving isn't the same as tolerance. Forgivers don't have to be fools. Forgiving is healing yourself of something that happened to you that you cannot tolerate, but you forgive it as the only way to heal the wound that it left you with.
I think it's hardest to forgive or consider forgiving someone when the person's died. And for me, my situation was that I was infatuated as a college student with someone who was about 12 years older than I was. And I was young and he was foolish. And we got involved in a relationship. And that wasn't so much of the problem or the issue. The problem or the issue is that, unbeknownst to me, he was having problems with his sexual identity. And so he was playing both sides of the field. Now, this was unbeknownst to me, and we were having a serious relationship. The relationship broke off suddenly without him giving me much information. So not only was I angry and hurt, he left out of my life, relocated to Texas, and wouldn't talk to me. A year later, I found out that someone called me a couple of weeks and told me that he had died of AIDS. And the change and the horror and the emotional strain it put on me caused me to have such anger and hatred of not only him personally, but of the dirt that men will do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can't figure yourself out, go somewhere else, blasey, blasey. And you talk about forgiveness, and no matter how much I've worked it out for myself, from that point of that next day putting all fear aside and taking that HIV test, to going through all other things, putting forgiveness in front, even though maybe I can understand now, has been the hardest part of all. And I have to admit, I still haven't done it yet.
Cheryl's experience shows how complicated forgiveness is, because life is so complicated. Hurt can get so beclouded with 1,000 side issues. I hear her say, "I don't know how to forgive somebody who's dead and gone. He's not around to say I'm sorry. He's not around for me to say I forgive you." So that's hard. She has to do what I call a solo flight into her own healing. She's also faced with the fact that she's not sure how much to blame him. He certainly hurt her, but she's not sure whether she should be blaming him for it. He was having trouble discovering who he was, discovering his own sexuality. But the fact is that he used her. He used her to make a discovery for himself, and then left her. I think that guy needs to be forgiven, and I think Cheryl can be helped by forgiving him. But it'll be a tough job for her, because she won't have that wonderful experience of reconciliation that often we want to follow forgiveness. But she's just going to have to come to terms with the fact that she's got a real case of a pain she should never have borne. And the most important thing that I would want to tell her is be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself. A deep hurt like this takes time to heal.
If I look back over my life, I see all these petty instances of where, I have the standard of the way I'd like to be. And then I apply that to other people, since I fall way short of that myself, and I don't have to look at that. And all these people have done, through my whole life, there's this litany of petty ills that have been done to me. And those people really aren't in my life anymore. I sort of just discard them rather than have to deal with that. And my son, the other day, I discovered, we live on a kind of in the country on a rather large place, and there's corners of our property that, go unseen for long periods of time. And I'm a big schemer and have had plans to do one thing and another. And I've got this stash of beer kegs, old stainless steel beer kegs down there by the lower fence that I was going to make gas tanks for some boat that I hadn't built yet. And he had gotten down there with a wrecking bar, kind of a gigantic crowbar, with some of his friends, and they were trying to pierce one of those, to tear it up. I mean, he was 9 years old, and at age 9, you just try and tear things up. That's kind of the way life is. And I discovered it long after he had done that, and apparently had some interaction with his mother about that. I was so angry when I found that. I mean, those were mine, and he was destroying my property. And I confronted him with it, and I just, I really kind of blew the whole thing up, and I realized that this is one of those incidences in my life that I've just discarded people over. You obviously don't care about my things, you don't care about, how I feel, and, to hell with you, and then walk off. And I can't do that with my 9-year-old son. And so, I talked to him a little bit, and I tried to be honest with him, and then I said, look, I want to forgive you for this. I want to let this go, and I want to forgive you. And it felt so strange to do that, but it was so freeing in a way. And I'm just not angry at him about that anymore. And then I had to look back, over time. Now, those kegs been down there about 10 years. Before he was born, I had those. And I was so outraged that he had damaged those. Well, I had acquired those, or, I guess in the street we say I swiped those at one point years ago, and they weren't even mine. And this is the standard of, judging others, that, I just want to be so righteous. And, I'm not. And I'm learning to forgive.
I find it, the incident, a terribly intriguing one, and I see so many parallels in my own experience, having brought up kids who sometimes did something that I didn't want them to do, and discovering that I was angry at them, not so much because of what they did to something, but that their doing of it reflected on me. And their doing of it was a way of saying, I don't care about the old man's feelings. I don't care about my relationship to him. I don't care if he's hurt by this. I don't even think about it. So I'm angry at my son for reasons other than the ones I'm focusing on. My youngest son, bless his soul, he's a wonderful guy, but he had a lot of obstacles in his way of life. I won't go into what they are, but he had a lot to fight against from his birth. And he had reason to believe that he was not going to live beyond the age of 21. So he didn't see much point in anything. So he was doing some things in his adolescence that were pretty self-destructive. And some of them involved the family and involved me. And I remember one incident in which I was enraged. I was so angry at him. I grabbed him and I said, "You're my enemy. I love you, but you're my enemy in this. You're hurting me so bad that you're my enemy. And I don't know what to do." And my wife and I went out that night, an engagement we had prior to that. But he was the only thing on my mind. And I said, "We'll talk when I get back." And I said to him, only half believing it, I said, "John, I want you to know that I forgive you. I want you to know that this didn't happen. Didn't happen. In my memory, didn't happen. I forgive you." Well, that was half truth. If I were speaking the whole truth, I would have said, "I want to forgive you, and I'm going to try." But what did I forgive him for? I forgave him for assaulting my pride and my dignity and reminding me that I wasn't a successful parent. That's what I had to forgive him for. And that wasn't fair. That wasn't fair. In a way, I forgave him for doing something, but the thing I said I was forgiving him for wasn't the thing that was bothering me, that was hurting me. What was hurting me was my pride in being, and what was hurting me was the pride I wanted in being a successful father. And I wasn't a successful father. And he was reminding me of that. That's what hurt me. And I was being an idiot. What he did didn't really reflect on me. And what David's son did with those beautiful stainless steel beer kegs was not an assault on his father. It didn't reflect on his father, but his father thought it did. He interpreted it as being a reflection on him. So there was a lot of mushy stuff going on there that wasn't brought up to the surface. But the wonderful thing is, my telling my son I forgave him got me on the road to coming to terms with what I was really hurting about. And I suspect the same thing was happening to David. We live in a world where people get hurt, where good people hurt us, bad people hurt us badly. That's a fact about reality. The question is, how can we most creatively live in a world where people hurt each other? I think God is saying to us, I tried forgiving. It worked with me. I invite you to try it on each other. In the long run, it's the only remedy for pain you didn't have coming and pain you can't get rid of. This is the only way. And as I said 1,000,000 times, you forgive somebody and you begin to dance instead of wallow. You begin to walk with God. You ride the cosmic crest of love. You set a prisoner free, and you discover the prisoner you set free was you.